Well, good afternoon if you are in New York or in Texas. Good morning if you are in Northern California. Good evening if you are somewhere in Europe, Africa. Good morning overnight in Asia, Australia, and hello also in South and Central America. I'm Fred Plotkin. This is Fred Plotkin on Fridays on Adagio, the place where classical music happens. Adagio is a video and audio streaming platform dedicated to supporting artists and to making classical music and opera available to music lovers all around the world. Today's broadcast is May 26th of 2023. And in almost every case, I go live. In full disclosure, occasionally I will pre-record someone if that's the only chance I can get them. And I wanted today's guest to be on with me today. So we are pre-recording ahead of time before she enters rehearsals for the opera that she's about to open in tomorrow, if that's clear. The lovely soprano Nicole Heaston joins me from Texas, her home state. And we're going to talk about many things, but one of them is that she opens tomorrow night, so May 27th of 2023, in the very prestigious Spoleto Festival USA in Charleston, South Carolina, in the title role of Samuel Barber and Giancarlo Menotti's fantastic opera Vanessa. It's really an amazing modern classic. It premiered at the Metropolitan Opera in 1958. In my knowledge, although I have not seen this in much research, the originally intended artist for the role of Vanessa was Maria Callas, but she ultimately turned it down. And then they wanted to have Sandy Urinak, the wonderful soprano, sing it. And she would have been great. But about 6 weeks before the show opened at the Met, world premiere, new production, she pulled out and they handed it to Eleanor Stieber, wonderful soprano, very charismatic soprano from West Virginia, who sang a wide range of roles. She was a wonderful artist. I knew her when I was a kid. She was a great lady. And I never did see that Vanessa because I would have been an infant. But the opera was originally in 4 acts, and Menotti and Barber revised it in the early 1960s to make it 3 acts, and it's the playing edition now. So Nicole Heaston, I'm thrilled that you're going to be playing this in South Carolina. I wish I could come hear it. How were you approached about the role, and what attracts you to the role of Vanessa?
Well, my agent had called and said that he had heard from Tim Myers and from the Spoleto Festival saying, we're interested in Nicole doing Vanessa. So it was a bit of a shock to me because I was just like, Vanessa's it's a diva role, most definitely. So, whenever I'm taking on new roles, I always try and really think, is this something that'll work for my voice? It'll something that'll work for me. And I started listening to recordings. And so when I was going, I was listening to the aria first, Do Not Utter a Word. And every time I heard it, it was like, the singer sounded so much older. Even singers who were young that were singing, it had this kind of dark hooded sound. And I'm like, well, that's not really who I am. And so I was like, I don't know, this may be too much for me. But then I called upon seeing a video of Kiri Takanawa sing it. And
I
Kiri,
saw her do that in Washington, D.C. I saw that performance.
and it was
Yeah.
a lighter tone. She was very Kiri. She was Kiri. And I sat there and I was like, oh, this can be done that way. And so I had called a fellow soprano who I had heard had done the role. And I said, I heard you did this role. What did you think of Vanessa? And she said, oh, I didn't do that. That was Aaron Wall. And I was like, oh. And she said, well, isn't that a role that people do at the end of their career? And I sat there and I was like, I don't think so. But then it dawned on me. The reason why so many people are singing so much older is because so many singers, especially women, do not want to say, I'm 40 years old or I'm 50 years old. They want to still say they're 38, And so I think a lot of times people push off Vanessa until they're much more older and the voice is darker and heavier to sing Vanessa. But Vanessa's not that old. She's waited 20 years for Anatole. And so when I looked at it from that point of view and I heard Kiri Takanawa and I started singing some of the pieces, I was like, I can do this, and I think I can do it well.
Briefly tell the story of this waiting for Anatole, because for me it's like Penelope in the Odyssey, that she's waiting and waiting and waiting for this man to come home, and then when he comes home, she gets a surprise.
Yes, she does. Vanessa has been waiting in her home, waiting for this man she loved 20 years ago, Anatole, to return to her. And it's the weirdest thing to sit there and wait for someone for 20 years, but she did. And as most women, you're trying to she knows that this man is coming, so she's trying to keep herself up. She's, making sure she doesn't get too many crow's feet, and she's obsessed with the way she looks. And when finally she receives a letter and says Anatole is coming, she's ready to bring him to the home. And when he arrives, she's like, don't even look at me just in case I'm not as beautiful as I used to be, regardless of the fact he should be 20 years older as well. But
Exactly.
she wanted to be youthful for him. But then she turns around and it's Anatole, but Anatole's son. And so she doesn't recognize him at first, and she freaks out. But then she comes to find out that that's Anatole's son, and he had heard so much about the woman that was the shadow of his parents' marriage that he wanted to come and see her. So she immediately falls in love with him because I think she reminds him of Anatole, she reminds him of her youth, and she wants to be with this man, but he's not all that, he's not all the what's cracked up to be. He's not the best, because when he comes, he seduces her niece, Erica.
Erica.
And it becomes a love triangle that Vanessa kind of is aware of what's happening, but in complete denial that it's happening because she wants Anatole that badly.
It's kind of kinky, actually.
Very much so.
Yeah, because then there's the wonderful old, I don't know if she's an aunt or a duchess or what she is.
She's my mother. She's the baroness.
Baroness, yes. And it's often played by a very grande dame of the opera. And in the original production, it was played by Regina Resnick, who was not elderly at that time, but she could play olds very well.
Right.
So 40 years later, when she was actually old, she was still doing old lady roles, but she could play that when she was younger. You have the wonderful Rosalind Plowright, who before we went on air, I was telling you about my very first guest in my first year of Fred Plotkin on Fridays. She, I think, was my seventh guest. So she came very early, and she's fantastic. And I think you will love working with her when you start your rehearsals. She's really an outstanding artist with a lot of history, and I think it'll be great for the two of you to hang out and for you to ask her questions. She and her husband have been in the business forever, and these are wonderful resources, and she's a great artist, and you can tell her I said so.
I will. I've heard wonderful things about her.
And then there's he's like the old doctor. Basically, there are five of you. There are a couple of other little characters who's a bass. And he too is kind of mysterious. When I looked at the story, it's kind of like a combination of a ghost story, a little bit of Queen of Spades, Peak Dame from Tchaikovsky, a little bit of A Doll's House, of women being locked away. It's not derivative, but it just combines all of these elements. Allegedly, and we only say allegedly, it was inspired by a story by Isak Dinesen, the Danish writer. And the book tells us that it's set in a northern country. It doesn't say which continent and so on.
Yes.
It could be Canada. It could be Sweden. It could be Japan, northern Japan. It really could be anywhere, but a northern country because it's cold and it's dark. And there is this ghost story element with mirrors and windows that are covered. It's a fantastic modern work. I mean, modern at this point, it's 60 plus years old, but people say there are no great works being created. And you, and I want to get into this more with you, are an example of an artist who does the classics, the Mozart and the Handel and Monteverdi, but also are very immersed in modern opera. But let's stick with Vanessa some more. How did you prepare for the role, and when you enter rehearsals, what you will be doing in rehearsal? She's a towering figure. She really
is. I think I hate to say it, but sometimes I laugh at her a lot because I think she's like crazy as a bag of cats in some ways, as I say, because it's so dramatic, it's so emotional, and it's so personal to her. And her ego and her lack of self-awareness is such an enticing thing to want to play, and play it very straight. Not there's nothing, she's very earnest in the way she feels. So one of the things I took when I wanted to come to this role is I wanted first to be musically solid. It's a very difficult role to do, as far as it changes meter excuse me, it changes meter and key literally every 3 measures.
Mhm.
It's so it was really, I wanted to be as accurate as I could in the music, so that when it came time for me to be dramatically this woman, this complex, very interesting woman, I didn't want to be worried about when do I need to come in, when what are these notes right, because there's a lot that she does musically that really informs who she is as a character. And so I've really dug really deep into even little things as far as the rhythms of, there's sometimes when it's a 16th note versus an 8th note. It's a total difference in how you perceive what she's saying and how she's trying to say it. Sometimes it's desperate, sometimes it's longing, and sometimes it's angry. I mean, it's amazing. But if you really dissect each note and the way it was written, Samuel Barber did a wonderful job in writing this. I know a lot of people say, oh, it's such a big role, the orchestra is very large. But the way he wrote the role for Vanessa is very, very smart. There are
Mhm.
times where the orchestra is da 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 da, and there'll be a break in the rests. And if you are actually right mark on time and not just guesstimating when you come in, he leaves it where you sing in that gap. So the music is large and then you cut through and then it comes back again. So it's
Mhm.
all of these little things where you have to be spot on for you to be able to be heard and do what you need to do to communicate the role of Vanessa. It's really cool.
Um, I think it's wonderful for all kinds of reasons that you, as a Black artist, are playing this,
Yes.
because we don't need to see. I would say there are maybe 1 or 2 roles in the entire operatic repertory where it really does kind of matter a bit what the race of the performer is, and even with that, we can vocally get around it, whatever. But otherwise, basically, I'm not conscious of that, and I want the best voice and the best actor and so on. But the only reason I'm mentioning this is that Samuel Barber, for a white man, earlier than most white composers, composed for Black voices
Yes.
in the 40s and 50s and 60s, at a time when, frankly, that didn't happen. Maybe a Black artist such as Martina Roy, Leontyne Price would take on music composed by white composers, but it's not that they were composing music for Black voices. And very specifically, Barber and Leontyne Price had an understanding of one another down to the deepest level. And he composed the Hermit songs, and he composed Cleopatra for her, and Antony and Cleopatra, in the Metro Opera House in 1966. I would love to have heard Leontyne Price sing Vanessa. I think that would have been an extraordinary performance from her. This is a very generic question that you can answer any way you wish. Do you hear anything in Barber's music that reflects that understanding?
I think when I think of it as black voices tend to have just a different timbre and color. I mean, it's absolutely a marvel of a thing, because I can hear a singer and immediately say, oh, they're Black. I mean, it's just what,
I can too.
light soprano, heavy soprano, tenor, you can tell it's a timbre. And there are things that I believe in the way you would sing it. I hear a Black sound. Like when you say Leontyne Price, she was one of the people that I listened to when I was listening, because she did record the aria. And I
Mhm.
did listen because she had that close relationship with Barbara. I wanted to hear what her interpretation of it was and how she moved through his lines, and actually hers is very different than what I heard from Renee Fleming or Christine Brewer or was it Arlene Auger? It's very different. And to hear a Black voice do it, it helped me hear it in my own throat, even though my throat is completely different from Miss Price's voice.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I think there were certain things where, I mean, I hate to say it, it did sound more Black. Just
Yeah.
it had a different bend to it when I heard it from her, but that's just
If
her.
if we can, I'd really like to explore this with you because I think it's important for all audiences, black, red, white, yellow, whatever color, mixed color, that there is such a thing as a black voice. And I grew up very fortunately in a very integrated mixed community before most communities were mixed. I grew up in New York City and had black friends early on, and I was part of their families. They were part of my family. So frankly, when I got into the larger world and saw all that hatred, it was a bit of a shock to me because I grew up in this idyllic People's Republic of Brooklyn, as we called it. And but I have a very dear friend, the great Nigerian British writer Ben Okri, Okri, who just came out with a new book of poems that have been well received in the US. He's won the Booker Prize, and Ben, I don't know if he was born in Nigeria, born in Britain, but has spent a lot of time in Nigeria. He has the most gorgeous speaking voice. He was on this program a couple of years ago. We've been friends at least 10, 15 years. And I once asked him years ago why so many people I've met from Nigeria and Ghana have extraordinarily gorgeous voices. And then I realized that most of the enslaved peoples who came to America from, let's call it America, from Africa came through Ghana and Nigeria. And I've always wondered whether the particular tonal voice qualities of people in that part of West Africa became the genetic foundation for what we call the Black voice in America. Um, if you were to listen to voices and singers from West Africa, and there are beautiful singers from West Africa who sing opera, would you recognize the Black voice there, or is it really a Black American voice?
No, I'm gonna say I would recognize it. I've heard from some singers, some reach out to me on Facebook and they'll send videos of them singing, and there is a definite sound, but I never thought of it that way. I did ancestry.com, and majority of my ancestors came from Nigeria and Benin, Togo. So
Yeah.
definitely West Africa. And maybe there is something to that of what translates into the American Black sound. I do find South African to be slightly different. You can still tell it's an African voice, a Black voice, but it is a different timbre than what you get as far as Americans.
It's also the placement of the voice in South Africa is different from West
Right.
Africa.
Yes.
It's more right here, whereas West Africa comes from a little deeper in my
Yes.
general experience. There are many wonderful South African singers, Black and white. There are a fewer well-known Nigerian, Ghanaian singers. One of them, a soprano that I've known, I worked with, his name Omo Bello, Bello, which is a fantastic name for an
Yes.
opera singer. And she's a Paris-based soprano.
Mhm.
And if if she were to be singing the music that you sing and you have similar repertory, you would say, well, yes, that's a Black voice, but that is a Nigerian voice in this particular case. And
Okay.
so to me, an area of growth for opera is West Africa. We have begun with South Africa. There's a fellow, an American named Kamal Khan, who teaches in Cape Town
Yes.
and has helped develop a generation of South African voices. To me, choral singing from South Africa is absolutely magnificent.
Yes,
And while
definitely.
the choral singing of the American Black churches does not necessarily reflect South Africa, there's something about the way South Africans sing in choral music and listen to one another. And there's the commentary and the pushback and the legato and the extension of certain notes for dramatic or emotional effect that I just love when I hear it.
Yeah.
Something like Black Ladysmith Mombasa is an extraordinary example of that. But to get back to Vanessa, I think that we're way overdue to have a Black artist do it. And when I heard that you were doing it, I was just thrilled because I think, as you said, that it's a role that may seem bigger and deeper and older than your voice and your Fach. But you correctly, in my view, said that by studying Kiri Takanawa, studying Leontine Price and seeing where you would connect, I know that you're not imitating them, but you are learning from them. So let's take an entirely other kind of role. Pick any role out of your repertory, from the more standard stuff, from Monteverdi to Handel to Mozart to Donizetti, and or even Gounod, and talk about how you might listen to other artists and what you would draw from them to do the role. So first, pick the role.
New role or a role I've already done?
Pamina, for example, if I were to
Okay.
pick a role, but
I would say I'll start off with Pamina. She's
yeah.
an oldie but a goodie. When I was learning and working with Pamina, I'm going to tell you straight off. I rarely listen to recordings when I'm learning a role because I'm very much a mimic. And so if I hear someone sing it, it took forever once I heard Kathleen Battle sing Balm in Gilead, where I could sing it like Nicole, because I'd heard her sing it first. Every time I was like, nope, I'm singing it like Kathy. So I decided in my youth.
You don't have to sing it, but if you want to speak it, how would Kathy sing There Is a Balm in Gilead, and how would Nicole do it?
Kathy did it with, she had a breathy quality to, there is a balm. And there is a balm. So just two different voices, but because I used to imitate it and that hurt in my
are a
head,
mimic.
I told you. So I can't listen to recordings until I've learned it myself. But when I was learning Pamina, she was actually one of the people I listened to. I loved listening to her. Barbara Bonney more so, actually, in some ways. I loved listening to Barbara Bonney. Dawn Upshaw, because as a young singer, I mean, it was one of the roles that I learned when I was younger. Everyone would say, oh, well, you're this type of soprano, and this is your Fach, and these are the sopranos that sing your rep. And what was always interesting is that if I ever did something and I had a review and they saw my face, I would be compared to Kathleen Battle. If they didn't see my face, I was compared to Barbara Bonney. So, which I took as a bigger compliment in a way, because it was like, it took
listeners to know Kathleen Battle is black and Barbara Bonney is white.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But those are the people I used to listen to when I would learn roles like that. Now, when I went to learn the Countess, I learned the Countess basically, I heard it so much after singing Susanna for years. So I had so many wonderful countesses in my ear just on stage. So, but I always wanted to go back to the people who I really enjoyed listening to sing those roles, like Kiri Te Kanawa and Renee Fleming, and even hearing, the rare recordings you have of Leontine singing it as well, even a bigger voice than what mine is. So I like to listen to them more for style and not vocal quality, because our vocal qualities are completely different. And I just want to say, oh, I like what she does here, or that's interesting, the way she tapered off here, or that. I listen for those things.
In the 1980s, when I worked at the Metropolitan Opera and people had answering machines where you recorded your outgoing message, my outgoing message was Leontine singing Dove Sono,
Yes.
which can mean both, where are the beautiful days gone by, but also, where am I?
Exactly. I'm not home.
And opera people and Italian speakers understood the joke there.
Yes.
But it's there. I'm going to say her name, Sonia Yancheva, recently formed a rather strong stir in the media and in social media by complaining about a critic, Zachary Wolf, in the New York Times, who she feels does his reviewing by comparing one artist to another artist, whether it's a current artist, whether it's a past artist, whether it's an artist who sung the role of Norma in this case or not sung the role of Norma. And I'm not going to weigh in about whether that's the way to do criticism. Zachary's been on this program, but it is a challenge when each one of you singers has her own personality and voice and style and upbringing and understanding of a role. And then each of you, and I can say this, you don't have to, is working with a conductor who may grasp or not grasp the limitations that the artist arrives with. And when I say limitations, I don't mean inability, but I mean choices. The
Exactly.
choice, for example, not to do a role a certain way, even though Collis or Sutherland or Cavalier sang it this way on a recording. But just the choices that they make, that this will, for example, Cecilia Bartley, a mezzo soprano, did Norma and Salzburg, and I heard it, and it's definitely Cecilia's Norma, and it is what it is, and many people loved it, a few did not, and but it's a valid interpretation. But she had a conductor who was willing to go there with her.
Yes.
So what I think that audience members and some critics don't always understand is that the artist arrives not unto herself, but preconditioned by the production she enters, whether it's new or whether it's a revival, how much rehearsal time there is, who your colleagues are, who your conductor is, what the theater is and how you sound in one theater versus another. The Met has very um, flattering acoustics to just about every singer. So that's not the issue. I think that it's a question of does a critic like the particular sound, the interpretation? And this is why I'm asked to be a critic about once a month, and once a month I say no, thank you. I don't want to be in the position. I'd rather share my love of opera doing things like this, or teaching opera, working with singers, or working in opera houses, even though I can write. But I don't feel that my best role is to do that. But do you, when you take on an existing role, not Vanessa, because not many people know it, but the Countess Almaviva, do you feel the weight of all the performances of other artists who have come before you for the past 220 years? Or how do you enter a role that is such a well-known and beloved role where any audience member has a preconception of who Rosina is?
Well, I have to say, it's taken me a long time to get to this level, but I'm at a point where I'm offering who Nicole Heaston is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as I said earlier, as young singers, you're put in a box of saying, this is what you sing, this is how you sing it. And I remember there were points where some singers and conductors and like, well, no, you have to do it this way. And I'm like, well, it's really touching me this way. And like you say, you go in, and sometimes when you're young and you don't have enough experience and you don't have enough of a voice, a speaking voice to speak up for yourself, you come into something and someone kind of bullies you into doing it their way. Now, granted, I'm always about being flexible and coming into a job, and because the way I'm going to come in, I'm going to offer, this is what Nicole's offering. Oh, you're offering this? Oh, I'll take this. I'll throw this away. Because I want to make the best performance for everyone involved, not just myself, but my colleagues, the orchestra, the conductor. So it's a collaborative piece, but there always has to be a uniqueness that is me, because if not, go home and just listen to a recording.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to present my own thing. So I've gotten to a point now where whenever I come in with a very clear vision of who I am and what I want to present. It's up to the director or the conductor to say, or maybe I can work with that. And then I'll
Mm-hmm.
try and adjust, but I'll still always stay true to who I am. Because as a singer, it is tough to have someone constantly saying, oh, well, when I heard Collis sing it, oh, when I heard, Caballé or anyone, and you're like, but this is me. And at some point, it's very disingenuous, because before you had recordings, you didn't have that ability to compare so drastically to another singer from a previous generation. And the style of singing has changed as well. So when you put people in that box and expect them to stay in that box, and when they come out just a little bit and do something that you don't like, it's one thing to say, I don't care for this, but it's another thing to say, I don't care for this because this person did that. I think that's just a tad bit unfair.
How has the style of singing changed?
I feel that singing in general, I find it interesting that most singers, when you think of singing at the Met maybe 40 years ago, there was a lot of sound. It was a lot of stand sing, and that voice just went, "Ah." It was like voices were much more focused with a lot of squealo and just came across. Where now there's a softness more to the way people sing. I feel that's why a lot of times a lot of singers don't necessarily fill the house the way as we say, older singers would have done in the past. But I think there's a lot of things that contributed to that, the way the style of teaching and also the lifestyle that people are living, where we didn't have as many opera houses, we didn't have as many these singers who we put on pedestals from the 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s that we put on pedestals. They did not travel the way we travel. They did not jump around and do all the things that we're doing. So I think we're putting our voices are just in a different, I don't know how to say it. We're not, I think we're putting our voices to a little bit more stressful work than what they did. And also, a lot of their stuff was, we're just going to stand and sing. Nowadays, they want everybody to be this thin, wear no clothes on stage, and do a backflip while singing high notes. So it's a lot of different things that go to it.
Well, if you do a backflip in the nude, you don't get caught up in your dress.
That part too, which has happened to me more than once.
This is really interesting because I'm of this era, but I'm also of that era, in the
Yes.
sense that I was working in opera 50 years ago and heard many of the singers that people now talk about. I can tell you that toward the start of my career, I worked at La Scala in the 1970s. And people there who were older, including people who worked at La Scala, but especially the audiences, complained that the golden age was gone and there were no good singers and no good performances around. Now, I would say, excuse me, but I just worked on a production of Verdi's Macbeth with Shirley Verrett and Piero Cappuccilli and Veriana Lucchetti, and Nikolai Gyaurov would be around, and Claudio Bato conducting. And then we would have Simone Boccanegra with Mirella Freni and Cappuccilli and Carreras, and Domingo and Pavarotti were in the house all the time at La Scala. And Montserrat Caballé would come, and Grace Bunbury would come down from Vienna or Salzburg usually, and they would do a few Aidas together, reversing roles. And it was just kind of astonishing. And many of the older Milanese would say, it's not so good. And now when I talk to younger artists and I say that in my first 2 years at La Scala, I had many of the names I mentioned and more, and that Claudio Bato was the house conductor and Giorgio Strehler was the house director. And we had all of these, Zeffirelli would come in, and Pierluigi Pizzi and Jean-Pierre Ponel, and all these great old French conductors and a few British conductors, and Leonard Bernstein. And, it was kind of amazing. And I think that we just have a blind nostalgia. And I always say that we have another golden age now. We have extraordinary voices. We have much better trained singers now.
Yes.
But I'm very interested about what you say about the sound, because I would push back a little bit and tell you that a lot of the people, not Luciano, but everyone else, did move on the stage a lot in the 70s and were directed to do so. And there was a naturalism to the acting that we don't associate with that time, in part because the television technology was not so good. So they would be captured standing here, singing, and Shirley Verrett looking at Leonucci or Piero Cappuccilli as Lady and Mr. Macbeth. And then the camera would pick up his reaction and then go back to her face. It was not the kind of camera work that we have now, that is a lot more nimble and captures moments in ways. At that time, you just had stationary cameras and not much. And I think that's where we get that perception from, because yes, Luciano stood and he sang and it was glorious, and we don't need for him to move when he sounds like that. But everyone else did act and move quite a bit. And he acted with his voice gorgeously. And, if he sang Rodolfo, you knew that he was a lover and that he was inspired, or Mario and Tosca, or just about anything he sang. Even the Duke of Mantua, where he did not have the so-called physique du role, he was a charming young man as the Duke of Mantua, even if he just stood there, and Gilda and everybody else sort of surrounded him like satellites around the moon, around a planet. But yes, I do agree with you, and I've not really explored this enough about how the sound has changed. And it's very interesting because I love the sound of our modern singers. And they can often be very distinctive. And, if you were to play voices for me now on a recording, I recognize them not only by their sound, because frankly, there's a compression of sound that we don't have with recordings from the past, and I don't like the compression of sound,
Yeah.
but through the interpretation, through the speech patterns, through the fact that many British singers and German singers have better pronunciation now than their forefathers and foremothers did, where I could definitely recognize a British or German singer in Italian because it was terrible. But now it's not. Now it's
Yeah.
really not. And similarly, the American, in my view, has always been the most versatile of artists, being able to go just about anywhere and fit in and do what's required, but maybe not with the sense of being grounded in a culture like a Russian mezzo in a Russian opera, or a German baritone in a German opera. There may not be that, but the American compensates for that by bringing an aliveness and a versatility that they can go anywhere and do just about anything. You've sung in Europe. You've sung in Hamburg and Seville and Lille and Genoa and Montpellier and Oslo. And how is that experience compared to singing in your home country, especially your home state of Texas, where you sing often in Houston?
I absolutely love, that's my favorite part of my career, is getting a chance to go to other cultures and cities. And it's, I find myself making myself very much at home whenever I go to whatever country I go to. I make sure I fall right into whatever their traditions are. I like throw away all of my Americanisms, and I want to be a Spaniard. I want to be a Norwegian. I want to be, because I want to experience that, because so many people don't get a chance to travel the world and really be a part of a culture and a community. As an opera singer, I get to go, and I'm usually there for maybe 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks. And that's a longer time than just going for a week vacation.
Right.
So I get a chance to really engross myself in it. It was always interesting early on in my career, in some places where you would go, and at the opera house, I would be the only Black person. And it was something that I always had to just, resign myself to. It's like, because if you saw someone else, even Black, on the street, you're like, oh, hey, how are you?
Mhm.
Because it was so rare, especially in smaller towns in Germany and Italy. I would be the only person, and everyone would know who I was. Everybody in the village would know.
But were you known as the Black opera singer visiting from the States, or were you perceived as a Black person from, say, Africa seeking work or working there
Both.
in something? Yeah.
Both. One time I was even mistaken for an African prostitute. I didn't
Okay.
realize that much until later, when
Yeah.
a man tried to pick me up in his car, and I was like, "Oh, these people are so nice, wanting to give me a ride back to my hotel." No, I found out later.
Yeah.
but um, but no, but I love my job for that, because I get a chance to see and work with so many different people. Because a lot of times when I do work in Europe, I am working exclusively with whatever nationality I'm there with. If I'm in Norway, majority of everyone's either going to be there or from Denmark or maybe Sweden. If you're in Germany, everybody's probably going to be German in your cast. Everyone's going to be
Mhm.
Italian in your cast. So you get a chance to really interact, and you learn from their language, you learn from their culture, and actually it informs you, especially if you're singing in that language. Like in Italy, it was so wonderful to work with Italians on an Italian piece. And once they realized I was not adverse to them correcting me, or saying, they were so open and just so wonderful. And I learned so much, to the point where I was like taking other roles, like sitting on the beach,
Yep.
speaking my Italian to them. And they have their heads down in their books, and I'd say something, they'd be like, no, when it was wrong. you know, and so I love it. It is the best part of my job.
Um, I want to talk to you about the fact that in the coming year, you are scheduled to do lots of new roles, in some cases of new operas, and in other cases, roles that are new to you. If I'm correct, mostly in the United States.
Yes.
A couple of them are by Black composers.
Yes.
And what do you have coming up? I know you're doing Alice Ford, which is one of your popular roles. You're doing in Houston, near where you live. But then in San Francisco in November 29th and 30th, You're in an opera called Dido's Ghost by Erilyn Wallen and Wesley Stace, and you're playing the roles of Anna and Dido's Ghost. Erilyn Wallen, to mine, I don't know her, but I gather that she's very much with us.
Mhm.
She's not a composer of the
Oh, no,
past.
no, she's definitely with us. She's here.
Thank God. Talk about this composer in this opera.
Well, this opera is going to be very, very interesting. I saw that they have done it in England, and so this will be the US premiere of it. And it's basically a sequel to Dido and Aeneas. And Erilyn came up with this wonderful way of creating the role of Anna, who is Dido's sister. And she arrives in
Mhm.
Carthage and she sees Aeneas and is like, "Where's my sister?" But Aeneas sees her and she looks so much like Dido that he falls in love with her. And so it's about her falling in love with Aeneas as well, but Aeneas has gotten married, and the new wife is like, "All right, Dido's already gone. I'm not dealing with this one too." So it's about trying to get that love triangle, separated where it's just the two of them again. But she
So it's
died
like Vanessa.
very much so. It's his friend. But she does then start going through the process of what happened to Dido, and that's how we transition into Purcell's Dido and Aeneas. So a large part of the piece is actually Dido's Aeneas, which has been a dream role that I've wanted to do forever. And when I first saw this, I was so excited. I was like, I finally get to sing When I Am Late. And I'm just like, oh, and then I got the score and I looked, and the person who sings When I Am Late is Aeneas. So I was like, well, there
Yep.
that goes. But they're going to do a concert version of Dido and Aeneas, and I get the chance to finally sing the
In
whole role.
Berkeley. Yeah. So one of, people ask me all the time, the two questions I get most are, who's the greatest of the three tenors, Domingo Carreras or Pavarotti? And I always answer Alfredo Kraus, and people say either who's Alfredo Kraus or yeah, of course, because I knew Domingo. I mean, I knew Pavarotti, I know Domingo and Carreras, and I say Alfredo Kraus, and they say, yes, you're right, because Alfredo Kraus was a magnificent tenor. And the other question is basically, what's your favorite opera? And I can never name one, but I name a group of operas, and one of them is Berlioz's Les Troyens,
Hmm.
and the story of Dido and Aeneas. And one of my favorite characters in the opera is actually the sister Anna. And I would love to do a concert or a program sometime. Maybe you and I can do this together, in which I'll narrate and you'll sing about the relatives of the famous characters and who they are and what becomes of them, because Anna is a crucial role. She stays with her sister through thick and thin when everyone else has abandoned her.
Right.
But nonetheless, it's like Adalgisa in a way in Norma, that there are certain characters who stay faithful and help the tormented lead character get through it. But these are wonderful characters that require great singers and actors to play them. And Anna's a great role. It's a mezzo. And you're a soprano, but I'll be very interested to know about this Dido's Ghost and how that plays out. How did you first connect with the opera? Did Erilyn Wallen contact you? How did that happen?
Well, I'm going to be leaving actually pretty soon to go and do Amadigi di Gaula by Handel with Philharmonia Baroque
Mm-hmm.
Orchestra and Chorale. And I'm going to be doing that. And so they are the ones who are, I believe they co-sponsored it with the other companies that did it in Britain. I think it was Mahogany Opera, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
They had because they had seen me sing at San Francisco Opera multiple times. When this came to them, they asked if I would be interested. I had I'm not currently, I'd in the past worked with the director, Freddie Wake. Oh my goodness, I'm going to say his name wrong. Oh, Freddie Wake, and I can't remember the last part of his name, but he was a director that I worked with in Finta Giardiniera in Glyndebourne. And
Okay.
so I guess he probably remembered me as well and was like,
Mm-hmm.
I would love to work with Nicole because I
So
loved working.
let me play opera quiz. The character in Amadigi is Melissa, and the character in Finta Giardiniera is Armina.
Yes,
Ding
that's
ding
me.
ding ding. Okay.
Very good. You get the star. Yeah.
um. So that was your way in.
That was my way in. Working with Freddie was absolutely wonderful. He makes a very collaborative special group when he puts us all together. The first week of Finta, we were all walking around in circles together, and he was like, I want everyone in sync with their feet. And we were all looking at each other like, when are we going to start staging this thing? And we couldn't understand what was happening until much later when Christiane Karg, she had
Mhm.
fell on stage and did something where like separated her knee or something. And they came to us when they stopped the entire show. I've never been on a show that had been stopped, and this one was stopped. And they were like, we don't know if we're going to be able to go on because she can't put any weight on her leg. And they were like, we may have to, shut it down. And I was like, are y'all crazy? I said, do y'all not know Christiana? I was like, she is solid German stock. She's going to finish this show. And I was absolutely correct.
Yeah.
They put her in a chair, but this is where Freddie's direction came in. They put her in a chair on the side of the stage, but because we were so in sync with each other with all of the exercises that Freddie had us do before, we were able to do all the staging surrounding her for the rest of the run. It was amazing. But that particular show, how we ended it was amazing. We all looked at each other like, how did we do that? Because we were so in sync. I was so impressed with it because it all came full circle.
There are numerous stories like this. I teach Italian opera at NYU, and I had my guest Katerina Gubanova, the Russian mezzo who lives in Italy, and she was about to do her first Venus in Tannhäuser by Reut and broke her knee in a production there in rehearsal. Joyce Di Donato doing Rosina in the Barber of Seville in London broke something with Juan Diego Flores and did it in a cast. Carol Vaness broke something in New York and did it with her leg extended singing. It was either a Domine or La Clemenza di Tito. It happens too much. And I criticize the stage directors for this because they don't seem to take that into account. I would bring then the example of Beverly Sills, who I knew pretty well. And Beverly, when she would begin a role, I would ask her, how do you start the role? She said, with the feet, with the shoes. When I decide what shoes my character would wear, I go buy them in my big feet. And once I'm comfortable in the shoes, then I create the character. So her Manon, the Massenet Manon, had very particular shoes for each act. And she was barefoot in one act, or seemingly barefoot. And Beverly managed to do that because of the shoes. And she had enough clout in the business that she would say to stage directors, I'm wearing my shoes, and then you can do the rest of the role, the rest of the character, the costume, and so on. But she always picked her shoes because she did not want to have discomfort. Birgit Nilsson, the same. Jesse Norman, the same. Norman wore Birkenstocks in a lot of productions I worked on
Wow,
with her.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah, in Carmelites, in Les Troyennes, which was her debut. Ziglinda, she had sort of a covered Birkenstock. It didn't look sort of open toe, but it was the same kind of thing. She was a very large and heavy woman. She was tall and heavy. But Beverly Sills was tall and often heavy. Not all of these ladies are, but they want to begin with shoes that work for them.
Right.
Joan Sutherland, differently, she was okay with her shoes, but she would arrive with her own costumes. So
really?
if you're doing Lucia or Norma, she would arrive with her costume that she was comfortable with, no matter what your production looked like. If you had a modern Lucia and she showed up in tartan with the plaid and so on, you had to take Dame Joan with her tartan and plaid,
Hey,
no
I
matter
take
what your production looked. I would too. But singers nowadays don't necessarily have this kind of clout. I think it's fair to say,
yeah.
and it's problematic.
Well, we try. I mean, there's
Yeah,
certain things that, there are a lot of people who are very accommodating if something
yeah,
really does not work.
yeah,
But just like you were saying, she did it with Carmelites and Troyenne. It's easier because those costumes come all the way down to your feet.
right.
Nowadays, you're doing modern productions and you're not going to get something that's going to cover your feet. So whatever's going to go on your feet, they're going to see.
Miss
But I'm all
Norman
about,
had clout.
yeah,
Miss
she
Norman
had
had a lot of
clout.
clout.
She did.
So your next, not next opera, but another upcoming opera is at the Los Angeles Opera by William Grant Still. I know him, I know his work, but I don't know this opera, Highway 1 USA. What is
Yeah.
that opera?
Well, this is
You
about
play the role of Mary.
yes, I'm playing the role of Mary, and I'm married, and my husband and I, we're happily married. We love each other very, very much. but we've taken in his nephew, who I have a problem with the fact that I feel that he is very lazy and taking advantage of my husband's kindness and taking care of, taking advantage of both of us, but especially my husband. So that's where the conflict lies, because the nephew is very lazy and just taking our money and taking our space. And so it's about that conflict in their marriage. So it'd be a very interesting thing to do, a kind of a character study of a Black marriage, something that you really don't see a lot in opera. I know that this has been done, like they did it at not San Francisco, at St. Louis a couple of years ago. And I think that Ellen may be one of the first major opera companies to be putting this work on. So I'm really excited to do it.
I must confess, although I knew the names and works of William Grant Still and have known in my ear the work of this composer, I'd never even heard of this opera.
I hadn't either until they did it in
Yeah.
St. Louis.
Yeah. Have you heard it? Have you listened to it? You've read the score?
Yes, I've read the score.
What are you beginning to connect with this opera?
I think it's really, really nice. I like the way it's written. I like the way Mary's written. To me, and I don't know if it's because William Grant Still grew up with this, but to me, she was Black mothers that I knew. The way she speaks to her husband and speaks about this man, it all talks about the nephew. It is all very grounded in like conversations I've heard my grandparents had talking about some trifling cousin that won't leave the house and won't do this. So reading it and listening,
And
I
he's
was like,
46, yeah.
yes, I'm like, I've heard these conversations. And so it's very grounded and very real for me as a person because I've experienced it. So that's why I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And I believe it's going to be a new production as well. So I love doing new productions because then you get a chance to really put your own stamp on it and create who this person is. And you're not trying to fit in somebody else's interpretation.
And then in May, around my birthday of 2024, you are singing in Massenet's Thais in Utah.
Yes.
Which is kind of like singing an opera about drinking and alcoholism in Saudi Arabia.
I didn't think of that, but yes, you're absolutely right.
It's a lot of emotion, let's say, and a lot of temptation and a lot of seduction. And Utah is a much more complex state than people who don't know it. It's the state that has the highest population of Mormons in the United States, and Mormons are a lot more diverse than they're usually given credit for, and some do drink coffee and so forth. But nonetheless, it's a very interesting choice, and I commend Utah Opera for going there. But frankly, a lot of opera, Rigoletto is an opera that would check certain boxes for people who object to certain behavioral things. But this is a little too early to tell. But in thinking about playing this role of a very sexy woman in ancient Egypt who then finds religion at the same time that the man who tried to convert her loses his religion, and then she dies, of course, because it's opera, and she dies in the desert, and Utah has a nice big desert. It should be very interesting, the emotional and spiritual echoes that this opera will create in the audience. Have you played Thais before?
Well, that's the whole thing. I was supposed to do Thais, I think in May of 2020 in Utah. And then that just went away. And it was heartbreaking because Thais is not something that you're going to do that often. It's much like Vanessa. It's a rare opera that's done. So I had learned all of this and I'm like, I did all that work and it's just gone. So I was so happy when it finally came back. But it's interesting you say that about the Utah audience. I personally think that I've done the Marriage of Figaro there once before, and one thing I found out about the audiences in Utah is they are very, very in touch with the arts. And I think that the way they respond to the arts, regardless of the fact that it's about, like you said, sensuality and lust and that type of thing that you would think that would be very faux pas for them, I think as an artistic venture to go see, they're all in on that. I think that
I commend them for that. That's terrific.
I totally, when I was absolutely surprised that when we did the Marriage of Figaro there, full audience every night, completely committed. And I was like, they are so in. And I even went to like one of their young artists was giving a program. And when I was sitting there, it was like the ladies were there with all their children, 7, 8 children sitting in a row, stair step, silent. The kids weren't, all about, they were focused on what it was. And I was told they are very committed to the arts here and
Yeah.
culture, and they bring their children, and that's how they raise them up. And that's how we have a full audience, because they
Yeah.
raise them to appreciate this.
And that's terrific.
Mhm.
I will not say the state, but it was a state in the middle west of the United States that has a great musical tradition. And I was involved in a production of Gounod's Faust. And they had to, or they chose to post all kinds of warning announcements about the content because they felt that they had to. Now, Faust is an often told story. Anyone
Yes.
who knows literature or the arts knows the story, and temptation, redemption, and dealing with the devil and so forth. I mean, in churches all around the country, we talk about resisting the devil on Sundays, and
Yes.
nonetheless, you don't require warning labels to go to church. And in you might want to, but you don't. But in this case, the opera company felt that they had to put warning labels, with the result that it kept people away
Really?
because they thought, well, we don't want to bring our kids to this, or maybe this is not proper for young adults who are religious, whatever. And, it's part of life experience. And Faust is a very heavily religious Christian opera.
It is.
So, and one person gets redeemed in the end. We've got no spoilers, but one person gets redeemed. And therefore, there is that message too for people who are religious Christians. But I think that we're going too far sometimes if we have to warn people about the content, when in fact so much of our movies, that anyone can walk into, has stuff that's so much more awful and
Right.
unredeeming than anything that an opera, certainly a classic opera like Faust or Thais, can present.
Right.
What is the Purple Robe song? Is it
Series. Yeah. Purple Robe song.
series?
Purple
Tell me
Robe
about that. How's that for a neat transition?
Okay. Well, the Purple Robe Song series, it came out of COVID.
Yeah.
Like I said, I had lost pretty much all my work, including that Thais.
Mhm.
And after a couple of weeks, I really was bored and I wanted to sing or do something. And a friend of mine had put on their Facebook page a 30-day song challenge where people were just supposed to, comment every day. Like the first one was day one, name a song that has a color in the title. And then the next day was something else. And so I looked at it and I was like, I could think of a song for every single day. So I said, well, why not? I'll just sing a song, just turn on my phone and record it. And then I was like, do I feel like doing my hair and putting on, I was like, no, I don't feel like doing my hair and I don't feel like putting on clothes. So I just said, I'm just going to grab this robe and I'm going to wear this every day. And it was my purple robe. And so I put that
What, as
on.
in a bathrobe or something for church?
Oh, it's a bathrobe. It was laziness personified.
Okay.
And so I started singing and people were tuning in every day to hear what song it was, because every version of the day was different. So I sang something that was gospel or R&B or classical or rap. I even rapped, which was really, really, really hard. And I just did all styles of music. And then I would add humor to it the way I like interpret it. And people really enjoyed it. And after 30 days, people were clamoring for more. I needed sleep because I would do one video a day. But then after a month off, I was bored again. And I was like, yep, it's time to do another Purple Robe song series. And it just kept getting bigger and bigger. And to the point where even I had done a Purple Robe where I woke up in the middle of the night and I said, I want to do a recording of me and as many Black opera singers I know singing Roland Carter's Lift Your Voice and Sing. And I was like, I don't
And
know if
that's where I encountered it. Yeah.
Yes.
That's why I asked whether it was a church robe or a bathrobe.
Well, that one, it started off with just small. I called Kenneth Overton and I said, hey, Kenny, you think I could call some people and they'd want to sing? Because a lot of people were very adverse to singing on the internet during COVID.
Mhm.
At the very beginning, they were like, "Oh, my voice is meant for the theater," and I'm like, "If you like to sing, you like to sing." So I asked people, and they joined in, and then I asked George Shirley and Donnie Ray Albert and Lawrence Brownlee, and and so we had people who had just left college, and then people who were like, George Shirley,
Yeah.
and I
George
called.
Shirley being the legendary black tenor. He's in his late
Yeah.
80s now, professor, University of Michigan. In many ways was the first, the way Leontine Price was the first, or Marian Anderson, the first contralto, Leontine, the first opening night star soprano. George Shirley was that for tenors, black
Yes,
tenors.
he was first.
Yeah.
Yeah, first tenor to sing a leading role at the Metropolitan Opera. And I called Ryan McKinney because my technical skills with editing was very rudimentary at that time. I've gotten a lot better since then. But I called him and asked him would he do it, and he said, "I'm going to do it for free because I think this is going to be something." And I was like, "Okay." And everyone took it so seriously and had so much fun making the recordings. And like I started a little Facebook group of all of us, and everyone was trying to get in it, but I was like, everyone can't be in it. We'll never be able to get all these little faces in there. And when it came out, it was just viral. It went everywhere and was seen by millions of people, where I was getting calls from major conductors from opera houses saying, "Congratulations on doing this." And I got calls saying, Hank Aaron was playing it. It played at his funeral. It played,
Okay, so
at
for
church.
people who don't know, we have an international audience. Hank Aaron,
Oh, yes.
one of the greatest baseball players ever, hit more home runs than any other player without using steroids or anything else. Um, I'm an author, and Hank Aaron and I had the same literary agent. And my agent, David, came up with a wonderful title for Hank Aaron's memoir, If I Had a Hammer, because his nickname was Hammering Hank. But If I
Hmm.
Had a Hammer is also one of the great civil rights songs. If I had a hammer, I'd swing it in the morning, I'd swing it in the evening, all over this land. It's a hammer of justice. It's a hammer of freedom. It's a hammer of love between my brothers and my sisters. Did you know I knew all this lyric?
I didn't see.
And so Hank Aaron is a legend, and he was from Alabama and endured incredible racism. And he played for the Braves, which were the Boston, then the Milwaukee, and then the Atlanta Braves. And when he was approaching breaking Babe Ruth's record, Babe Ruth had 714 homers, Hank Aaron 715. He received death threats. It was just horrendous. And he very bravely got through all of that. And he was a quiet man. He was not the most extroverted athlete, not a Charles Barkley or someone like that. He was just very quiet, but spoke with his bat and spoke with his athleticism. So I'm glad to know that was played at Hank Aaron's funeral.
Yes, it went
Yeah.
everywhere, and then I did two more after that, and people really enjoyed it, and it was fun for me. It was a chance for me to actually make videos in my home with my family. I would call opera singer friends and say, "Hey, let's make this video. Let's sing the duet from Popeye." Okay, sure. And I mean, everyone was game, and so
Mhm.
it just was a lot of fun, and it brought a lot of people a lot of joy. I have so many people that come up and say that it helped them get through COVID, just waking up and saying, "Oh, what video do we have today?" So I feel very blessed to be able to do that for people.
Would you, as we conclude, talk about the song Lift Every Voice and sing what it means? If you want to sing it, don't fight the feeling.
I'm going to tell you that song means so much, and especially the Roland Carter arrangement. It's very personal to me because I grew up in Chicago, and I grew up in a Black Baptist church, and the our union we had like conventions all the time. And every time at the very beginning, they would say a prayer, and then everyone would stand and everyone would sing Lift Every Voice and Sing. When I was in the Chicago Children's Choir, which was a multiracial choir, we sang Roland Carter's version. When I was at churches, we sang Roland Carter's version. And it was a moment of pride in singing that. Every time you said it, the words were so profound and really spoke to me, even as a young person. And it always stayed with me. You can go to any historically Black college, those choir members know that piece because it is something that is very much ingrained. And my favorite time actually singing it was when Kathleen Battle came back to the Met. And a lot of Black opera singers connected on Facebook and said, we're going to go and support and just flood the Met that day for when she comes back. And we were all there. It was a lot of us.
And I was there too.
Yes, I remember seeing
She arrived rather late, but
a little. Yes, she did. But she sang "Lift Your Voice and Sing," and she had the words in her program. And I remember I was sitting there with my friend Anita, and we stood up and we sang, and everyone around us was like, "We don't know this song," and I was like, "We do," and it was like the most Black moment I'd ever experienced at the Metropolitan Opera because I could hear us in the balcony, I could hear us down below me. Everyone, all of us knew the song, and Kathy knew we would know the song, and that was just so electrifying to me. I loved that moment, and that's why I wanted to kind of recreate that for the Purple Robe song series.
Yeah. You want to sing a little of it, or no? You don't have to, but
I don't know. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. You caught me in. I warmed up today. You were lucky today.
Amen is all I can say. That was
you.
beautiful. Thank you. I'm glad that has been documented. And I know that even though this is being recorded a couple of months, not even a couple of months, less than 2 months before you begin your performances as Vanessa, toy, toy, toy for tomorrow.
Thank you. I'll remember this.
Yes. And this is being broadcast on May 26th of 2023. And if people are in or near South Carolina, if I were there, I would immediately run to Charleston and hear you as Vanessa, because you're a wonderful artist and a wonderful person to talk to. And I thank you, Nicole Heaston, very much.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Sure.